This is Bailey's favorite thing. Okay, any other questions? Any questions about, you know, we'll be having the midterm. It's going to be open for 48 hours. It will be in the quiz format. It'll be multiple choice. I am going to, at 11 o'clock, I'll have a 1 hour office hours that we can just go through it. Anybody can ask questions about it, but I'll just make sure that I reference the material. And if you have questions about it, you will do that. So you'll have 2 hours to complete it. And it'll be, again, as I said, multiple choice. So, okay. I finished grading the trifles assignment, so everyone should look for those. Some of you got video response. Some of you have text or written response. And if you haven't turned yours in, there's still time to submit it and get points for that. And I'd recommend it. It's not a very long assignment, so please take a look at that.
The trifles assignment?
Yeah, I think you did it, didn't you?
Okay. A short play and questions?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, short play with questions, that's right. So, just a second. I have to sit on this little pillow because my chair is very hard. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'm just going to move forward with the material for today. We're going to talk about two different things: dramatic conventions, which is the tools that, how the playwright writes the script so that the audience can actually understand the play and the characters more quickly. And then the second part, I'll stop the recording and I'll start a new recording because it's on a different page in your Moodle your modules, will be the how to look at a play performance report and what critics do. So we're going to talk about that because that's one of your assignments for this week, is to look at a play online. I've given you some suggestions. One of them, if people were working ahead, you had an opportunity to look at the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which was Andrew Lloyd Webber, a very popular piece. They had allowed them for free, but they only put them on for 72 hours. So if you missed it, actually no, 48 hours, 2 days. So if you missed it all, we'll try and find another musical selection, which I have one. I think Little Shop of Horrors I can also post, so that if you prefer to do a musical over a straight play, you can do that. But the other two play choices are quite excellent from very well-known theaters. Any questions about today? So I'm going to separate it into two completely separate lectures that will then be posted. The PowerPoints for which are posted already in your assignments on your on the presentation pages. Okay.
Okay.
You guys are so kind. Oh, did the Zoom, this is from William, and he's saying that the Zoom link on asked for a password. Is that, did everybody have to do that?
No.
Okay, so.
I had to do that, and it's the password just in like all this information. It's just the number. I was able to find it.
Okay, so so thanks for that, Ashley. So William, you got in via the link on the home page, meaning the actual link that's embedded in the page or the navigation button? Okay, so William, you use the navigation button on the home page. Okay, but the link that's in the home page is not correct? Or where did you get the link from, or is one that you saved? Okay, so I'm sorry if there is a problem trying to get in, but the homepage is correct, and that's why the navigation button is on the left-hand side of your canvas. That just go to that same one every single time, and I can post something in announcements for that. Let me just make a note to just use the nav button on the homepage. And also, just so that you know, before, since people joined at different times, I had a discussion with Mari regarding the headlines to the page. So I will be reviewing the groups today at 5 o'clock. Before 5 o'clock, sorry, I have an emergency dental thing. so I wouldn't do it before, but I will be reviewing those groups today. And if for some reason you are the only person in your group, then I will merge groups together so that you have someone with whom to interact. Okay, so even if it's just 2, that's fine. But if it's just 1, that's not a collaboration. All right, so thank you. Any other questions before we begin? We'll talk about dramatic conventions. All right, let me see about screen share. I'm gonna have to stop this for a sec. Sorry, you guys, I need to go to a different. I have too many windows open, as always, on my screen, so. Alrighty, I think I can clearly get to it now. I apologize for this awkwardness. I wish I had, what I need is 2 screens, and that would be excellent. I know some people have that, but I'm working from home, so I'm working with a laptop. Not ideal. All right, let's see if we can go to presentation form. There we go. Okay, that's not very helpful, you guys. Let's see. All right, maybe this will work. There we go. Everybody can see our screen clearly. I am trying to get used to working this way, and maybe at some point we'll see what goes on in the fall. Sorry, just to interrupt for 1 second. There is a big discussion about falls, particularly yesterday with the governor, well, Monday's late announcement regarding closing California again. So depending on where you're living, you may have greater restrictions than we had before. But at present time at Santa Barbara City College, we're still planning on certain theater classes going face-to-face. For example, the voice and diction class, the costume class, which I teach, and the makeup class will be lecture online, but labs will be face-to-face and be able to come to City College. So if anyone has any other questions, we can talk about that just during the break, okay? Today we're going to talk about dramas conventions or dramatic conventions. And I mean, you know, it's very, it's really interesting to talk about it because these are implicit understandings that I think have gone by the wayside. It may have been more typical at one point, possibly during the 60s through the 80s when playgoing was something that was perhaps a more regular thing in people's lives. But what has happened with the advent of cell phone, and I got my first cell phone probably before you guys were born in 1988 when I was looking at one of the very first ones, you know, it was about this big, it was about 3 pounds. But that changed these implicit understandings and ways of communication. So let's just look at this and see how many of these are still current today. Okay, here we go. What are dramatic conventions? These are techniques used by playwrights to get information across to the audience quickly. So this implies an implicit agreement between playwright, production, and audience. So what is this implicit? It means it's an understood and not discussed. So when you come to a play as an audience member, there are certain things and assumptions in place that you may or may not be aware of. So here are some of those that have been traditionally in place. And then, you know, things are trying to change it up. I think you guys are the next audience, or the current audience, and hopefully things will change, and the format of theater, I think, is changing. I think that the way we're looking at things in our quarantine world is going to be something that is very, very different. So it's trying to give you a shortcut into the information in the play. What kind of information are they getting across to you? What happened before the play starts? What happened right before the play started? That's one thing you need to know. And it's one thing that you cannot get from a play, because there may or may not be a curtain and you're just seeing some sort of static tableau up on stage until the actors or the lighting starts, or the actors come in, characters start talking. Unlike a movie, what's the convention that they use? They use, in television, they use a cold opening where they give you a like a 1 minute background of what's going to happen in that particular episode. In a movie, they have the credits over the top, the opening titles, and then they can show you big landscapes or small micro things that you need to look at so that it piques your interest and it gives you a context of what you're going to see. So we have to find out what are the shortcuts. Stage directions. So this one is, I find, quite controversial. Until fairly recently, stage directions could be something written by the playwright. They could be devised by the director as they were part of the first professional production. They could be, the director would look at what the playwright said and then say, well, I think they should be this, and kind of set the tone. Based on their discussion with the set designer, they could list that kind of furniture, perhaps. Or they could just be the stage manager documented certain things in the first production. So there's two kinds of stage directions here. One can be this beginning of the act, and it tells you what the picture is that you should look at for the stage. So the playwright can provide a word image to set the stage, or maybe this comes from the director with the discussions from the set designer. So it can be a literal discussion of, here's where the furniture should go, here's how many doors there should be, here's where they sit down. And then the stage manager adds in, Bob crosses to Mary and sits on the couch. That's a different kind of stage direction, and that would be blocking that is set by the director based on one particular play. And not even one particular play, it had become memorialized that way, but it was found in copyright law that the director really didn't have the purview to include that in the play. So what would happen is plays would be published, they'd be published with these director's notes, and then amateur groups all over would do this particular play, and they would just reenact these movements as directed by the director. In the back of the play, there would be a floor plan given, a ground plan, which showed the placement of the couch or the furniture or the doors, and they would just copy that. So that actually was an infringement on creative rights, so that set designers and directors weren't getting credited with the work they'd done, and everyone was just taking it. So if we look at the Streetcar Named Desire stage directions by Tennessee Williams in our textbook, they are incredibly detailed. And he's one of the most well-known authors or playwrights that gives really distinct stage directions. I'm just going to read a little bit of that here. Scene 1, the exterior of a 2-story corner building on a street in New Orleans, which is named Elysian Fields and runs between the L&N tracks and the river. The section is poor, but unlike corresponding sections in other American cities, it has a raffish charm. The houses are mostly white frame, weathered gray with rickety outside stairs and galleries and quaintly ornamented gables. This building contains 2 flats, upstairs and down. Faded white stairs ascend to the entrances of both. Okay, so he's given us a really big word picture of what this set should look like. The audience doesn't read this. it is dependent on the production to provide this information visually for the audience when the audience comes in and sits down, or when the curtain is opened. So while the playwright gives us a lot of information about how he feels a play should look, it is not something that the audience is even privy to. So I think that's quite interesting, that there's an assumption there that the audience is going to grasp all that information from just looking at the set. So the set designer has to have a clear visual language. Another way that you can have stage directions is the dialogue is used as stage directions. And Shakespeare does this most commonly because really it was an oral tradition. They did not write down the script for fear that it could be stolen, and the copyright laws were not well in place. So in dialogue form, as the Hamlet example in your script, in your textbook, you can really get everything that you need about what happened before, where they are, what's the mood of the play. Or look at the Euripides Trojan Women, same thing. So from Hamlet, when you say, where are they? Well, in the first line, the first few lines, you know that they're at the castle battlements. What time is it? 'Tis now struck 12. The weather, 'tis bitter cold. And the mood, I'm sick at heart at what's happening. Not a mouse is stirring. So if you carefully listen to the dialogue, Shakespeare is giving you everything that you need to know about the play. What happened before? Where are we now? What is the intent? And how we can go from here forward. Does that make sense to everybody?
Okay. Yes, it does.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I was like trying to reach my microphone.
That's okay. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. In fact, I'm going to stop for a quick sec because I need to make my screen a little smaller so I can see if anybody else is trying to come in or out. Got it. Okay. So let's go back and we'll finish looking at the rest of the dramatic conventions, and then we will take a break as our usual. Okay. The exposition. So this is who, what, when, and where. Let me get a comma there. Oh, darn it. I'll go. And so we need to know who. Who are the characters that are in this scene? What are they doing? When is it? We'll talk about time more specifically in a couple of slides. But when is it in the story? When is it in the context of the world? When is it in terms of time period? And where are they? So this is usually the very first few lines of the play. You are introduced to characters, either one or two characters introduce many, or each character comes in and has a short bit. It sort of gives you an idea of what they're doing, what are their relationships to each other, what are they doing in the play, when is this play occurring, what is the story, what are we supposed to be thinking about, and then where are they? So it gives the audience what they need to know to understand the story. So in classical writings, in Shakespeare, for example, it's given in a short dialogue between characters. And in a more modern play, the focus is on what's going on. So what do we think is happening here? And it's maybe less formally conveyed because the language is less formal. The language that is addressing one character to another is in a more familiar way. So there's less, in contemporary language, there's less distinction between if you're talking to someone of different status than you are. For example, if you're talking to your parent, do you talk differently than when you're talking to your friend? So there are things that are less formally used in terms of language. Whereas the formal language in Shakespeare varies little for status. So you can be the king or you can be the servant, but they talk somewhat the same to each. Immediately they want to get to the point of attack. So early in the play, right after we sort of figure out and we get the lay of the land, there is this point of attack, this inciting incident that propels the story into motion. So now we're getting going. Now that we understand who is in the play, what they're doing in the play, what time is it, where are they, we can get to the meat of the story. So this is a technique used by the playwright to indicate where we're going to go in the play. And so there's something, a little trigger point that just is hit here to give us the very next thing, which is a complication. So it's unexpected events. There's some new information. It develops into a crisis or a turning point and makes the resolution of the conflict inevitable. So what could be a point of attack? Well, it could be, some incident that happens. And then because of that incident happening, now we have a complication. So the people that we saw, now their relationship is going to change. They may be going to a different location. We think that something is going to happen. What are they doing? Maybe they're hiding a secret, and this secret is about to be revealed or is trying to be hidden. So all of this then propels us down into the story. Resolution or endings. So this is something that resolves a balance in the world of the play. It satisfies the expectation of the audience. And then there's a sense of completion. So when we talk about the beginning, middle, and the end of a play, in the beginning, we're going to have this sort of setting of the stage, whether that is visually or through exposition by the characters. Then there's going to be a point of attack. That will create a complication, which then creates tension within the play so that it helps the electricity of the audience waiting to understand and wondering what's going to happen. And then we have the resolution or endings that will hopefully satisfy the expectation. It doesn't mean that it wraps it up into a nice, tidy little bow, but it does give you a sense of ending so that, okay, the play is now over. Whether that was completely what you expected or didn't expect, there is some sort of a closing of the circle of the story. So there's a lot of things that happen within a play. Simultaneous plots is one of these kinds of things. So it relates past and present events. So while something's going on, the characters may in fact talk about things that happened in the past that helps explain why something is going on. So it relates the past to the current behavior or the past to the present events so that we, as the audience, can understand that. Two stories are told concurrently. It may depend on two different characters. So we have the main character, maybe that's 1, 2, or 3, and then we have secondary characters that are also having a simultaneous plot so that they're doing something going along as the main play story is going along. The secondary plot is resolved before the main plot, just because then all those things line up, and then we can put a button or a bow on the main plot. We'll talk about this again when we talk about A Doll's House. We can talk about it in another. When we talk about Tempest, we'll talk about this significantly. Conventions of time. Yes, I do love this. Sorry, I'm sort of a nerd about this kind of thing. So there's multiple kinds of time within every single story. What is the elapsed time that you're sitting in the seat to watch the play? And we always talk about this because, as we know, the ability to sit and focus for a period of time is getting shorter and shorter. People have less patience. We're not as willing to sit in a dark room and watch this play unfold. Somehow it's different for a play than for a movie, because in a movie it's more all-encompassing. You're not as aware or sitting as close to the audience person next to you. So you're not as aware of their response, their breathing. If they're fidgeting, then you start fidgeting. But in a play, it's all dependent on what is unfolding in live time in front of you. So this elapsed time, when do you get to your seat? When do you get up? Is there an intermission? And when is the play over? That is in contrast to dramatic time. And dramatic time is very elastic. It can stretch for a day. The day can be stretched as long as you need to, or it can be very, very short. So a day can be just 2 lines and then suddenly we're in the next day. So you have to look carefully at the script to see that. The time can be expanded or compressed. This is initiated by the playwright, but can be manipulated by the director. So the director can choose to make this seem like it's lasting longer or not. So if we think about Trifles, it takes place in really just maybe an hour or maybe an hour and a half. We see them come in, but they talk about what happened before. When they were going to town, they talk about what happened when they found John Wright. Then we know time has passed because Mrs. Wright has been taken to the jail. It's time for the county attorney to come. So depending on how you read the play, then this time sense can be slowed down. So if you want to feel something is particularly important, like the women's discussions in Trifles, maybe that is what you're going to focus on, and you're going to make that a warm and understanding piece, while when the men come in, it's very clipped. The language is more clipped, and thus it goes by more quickly. So the women's time can be expanded, the men's time can be compressed, but it still all takes place on one continuum within a couple of hours. Aristotle would like that, because Aristotle wrote in the Poetics about the unity of time, that the time elapsed in the story must match the time that the audience is sitting in the seat. So for Trifles, only a 9-page play, you might only be sitting there for 20 or 30 minutes. So that would match with Aristotle. And this seems very odd, but when you're thinking about Oedipus, the time elapsed in the story the time that they're actually talking would match the time that the audience is sitting in the seat, because what they do is they reference what happened in the past. But we start with Oedipus coming down the stairs and welcoming his people, wondering what's wrong, and then we go back in time and understand why he has this authority. But we see it go forward. We see the train wreck about to happen as a shepherd comes in. They find out the story about Oedipus. He finds out who he is. He's the one that's causing this, the plight of Thebes, and then goes in and sees Jocasta dead and gouges his eyes out. So what actually is happening in the play happens at the same time as the audience is sitting in the seat, but they're referencing what happened before, okay? And then we have time period. When does a play take place? What year does the play occur? What season is it? And how do we tell that time is passing? So again, if we look at Trifles, when does a play take place? So what year? We know it's 1916. It says it on the beginning of the script that it was written in 1916. So she could be writing a historical play about something that happened before, but because of the context of the play and the content within it, the dynamic relationships between men and women, the fact that this is on the cusp of when women are going to get the vote in 1920, we can assume that 1916 is actually, she's writing it in 1916 and she's writing it very close to that time frame. So what season it? We know it's bitter cold. It's very likely in one of those Midwestern plains states like Kansas, Oklahoma, something like that. It is absolutely freezing, but it's not so snowed in that they can't travel and they can't have movement. So it could be late fall. So you can figure all those things out from the dialogue. And then how do we tell time is passing? Because we get characters coming in and out of the story. We hear their feet stomping up the stairs, and then we focus on the women. We see them going outdoors to the barn. So when, in general, does the play take place? In 1916, in this probably late fall, because we don't feel like it's warming up. It's not spring. There's nothing in the language that talks about we're looking forward into spring when things are going to bloom. No, this play is talking about we're looking forward into this woman possibly being charged with murder. So it's going into winter, which is a bleak time of year. So you can see that's one of the ways that time period is so essential. And that's something that when you go see a play, you have that as an implicit understanding that the playwright will give you this information. Okay, another convention is that of metaphor. A metaphor equates two unlike objects to suggest similarities. So this can be creating a visual metaphor or using an artistic muse as a metaphor. For example, Fiddler on the Roof, the play Fiddler on the Roof, is often a visual metaphor for that is the paintings of Chagall. I've put that into the page, the presentation page, so that you can take a look at that. But you can see that the story in there is very much the story of Fiddler on the Roof, the story that the painter has used. So when you pick something that's a visual metaphor, so a painting, which is not a play, but everyone can hang on that same kind of thing, all of the collaborative team, whether it's the director, the actors, the visual artist, the scenic designer, costume designer, it can set a tone. It can set a feeling of movement. It can set color, and it can set a suggestion of line and composition. Simile, in contrast, compares two unlike things, saying, this is like this. A cup is like, let's see if we can think of one. So a simile must use the terms like, as, than, or similar to. So a cup is similar to the story of life because it can be the elixir that brings you happiness. Okay, so these are things that can be used to help understand the meaning of the play in a more subliminal level. And then we have the convention of the play within the play. This is the way to safely expose the truth of the characters in the world of the play. Shakespeare uses this frequently. So in Hamlet, both in Hamlet, which is a tragedy, and Midsummer Night's Dream, which is comedy, he uses this same convention of the play within the play. He uses a troupe of players to expose a truth about the king or someone that's in charge. And people are free to say things under the context of they're just a character in a play, so that the characters that are in the larger play, they may have an understanding of what their foible is, or they may be showing the audience that here we know what's going on with the king. So it can be really a way to expose and let the audience knows that these characters are in on the understanding that this person is rotten to the core, and yet the story that is about their thinly veiled characters are not aware that the story is about them, and they're just looking at it as a surface entertainment. So it can be used as a contemporary plot device. There's a play, Noises Off, there's an example in your script, in your textbook by Michael Fran, where there's a convention of you're seeing a group of actors that is what is happening off stage is as important as what is happening on stage. And we see both, the audience sees both sides of this performance. So they see the backstage of the performance. This is done really usually on a revolve. The stage turns around, and then you see the audience sees the front of the stage and the performance as though it's happening. The set revolves, and then you see backstage and all the different kinds of things that are happening there. So it's a really hard play to read because it's hard to decipher what's going on when you're actually reading it. But when you see it, it becomes so clear because off stage and on stage are two different realities. People that are in a relationship off stage have maybe enemies when they're on stage. So it's can be very dynamic, and it can be a very interesting way to look at a particular story. And it gives you two ways to look at the same story. So you look at the thinly veiled play within a play story as an exposure of the greater truth of what's happening in the story. So the stage is a metaphor for the world's illusions. So we really do live in a world of illusion. We like to think things are happening one way when they're not. And it can illustrate life's theatricality. The audience sees their life bigger than life because it's on stage and someone else is talking about the things that they have in their experience. And that's why it's so important, because you have a real life person portraying a character talking about something that actually might be touching your life. And I believe that's the end. So let's just quickly ask if there's any other questions. I'm going to look at the chat briefly. Okay. So any questions about dramatic convention? Okay. Now feel free to put something in the chat if you'd like. Meanwhile, I will go to Jennifer's question of, will I please repeat my comments on the mini groups? So the way that you can interact more directly with a smaller group of people, rather than just a discussion where you can throw in behind anyone's discussion and you create your post. This is to actually interact with a smaller group, 2 or more, and come to some consensus about a particular idea. So they are divided into each headline. This is under the Headlines to the Page project. It's a 3-part project. There's a short video where I tried to explain and outline what happens. So you will, first post your headline, which most of you have done, and then you go to your small group, do a brief introduction of yourself so that you're not working with a complete stranger. And then in that small group, you will select one of the headlines that one of the persons in the small group has made in the discussion, and hopefully connected a link and documentation to that, so that you can then discuss that headline in the context of the elements that we talked about and the playwright's tools: plot, character, and language, spectacle, music, and bring those things to all under the umbrella of the genre in which this particular headline could be produced. It's one of the ways that a playwright finds, what am I going to write about? They take it right out of the headlines of the newspaper. So you went to a newspaper, you found something that was compelling to you, and you're just going to do a brief presentation on creating, this is the headline that our small group has decided we'll go forward with, and we're going to flesh it out in terms of, this is plot, who does what to whom, here's the number of the characters, possibly these are the actors that we'd like to portray these characters, here's their little character story behind that, and this is how the language unfolds, this is how quickly do they talk in a dialect, is it Southern, is it in a language that we don't necessarily understand, does it need subtitles, is it slang, is it something that's really in a certain common vernacular for a particular region or a particular group of people. What kind of music or soundscape would go along with that? And then what kind of visuals would you have along with it? So what would the environment look like? You can just pull some, it's just like, creating a collage, just pull some images together and say, it's going to be urban, it's going to be rural, it's going to be super contemporary, it's going to be historical, it's going to be old-fashioned. We want it to feel antiquated. We want it to feel very now. We want it to feel forward-thinking. So hopefully those are some ideas. But today, I'm going to go into every single group. I had set up 7 groups because that would allow 4 people per group. And then if people have not participated or you're the only one in your group, then I will change that so that you're in a group of at least 2. So does that help understand? Does that help clarify your information about that? Yes?
Yes.
Yay!
Yes.
And I just wanted to note that on Monday, Bailey, I wanted to apologize to you because on Monday we said we're going to go take a look at this, and I think that perhaps you thought that I meant that you needed to go away from our discussion so that you could do that, and I've been meaning to reach out and tell you that I felt that I maybe misled you on that.
Oh, okay. It's okay.
Yeah, no worries. So you can look at the recording if you feel like you missed something, and then you'll be able to. We had a great discussion, William and Dominic and I, so that we could figure out exactly more. We were discussing this headlines to the page so that then we could get a more specifically clear way to present it. So for me, because this is a project that I've done several times, but I've never had to do all of the explanation online, it's something that it's hard to intuit without a human being talking about it. So I appreciated the discussion that we had. Okay, any other comments for now? So I'm going to pause the recording now because I need a few minutes right now. So let me just pause. Actually, wait a second. I'm actually going to stop the recording because I'm going to do a second recording for the second part of the class.